Welcome back to Old Guy REI. Last week, Mikey and I started a new segment on the channel called Contractors Corner. And what we're hoping to do, Mikey has some questions about the building industry and remodeling in general. So we thought it would be good to cover some of these topics and they might help some of the people out there watching. And also, we just wanted to mention that you don't have to wait to watch these videos. If you have questions about something you're going through, you can email us at oldguyrei@gmail and send in your questions. And then maybe we can do a video on those topics as well. That might be helpful. So thanks,
And
Mikey.
35, yeah, sure. And 35 years experience as a general remodeling contractor. So it's always great when you have that in combination with being an investor too. So you see it from both different viewpoints. It's yeah,
Yeah,
incredible value.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we've been doing it a little while. We've done a couple of things that I hope will be helpful to some people out there that haven't. Did you have some questions for us this week?
So I did want to cover the subject of PECs. And you were talking about there's two different types of PECs, type A and type B. So I just kind of was curious about those.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I shared a video from a guy who was talking about the differences of PECs, and he was at Home Depot, and we just started talking about the two types of PECs that we've used in the past. And there's PECs A, which is the stuff you buy at Home Depot, and one of the differences is how it's attached to the fittings. On the PEX A, they have special fittings and they have clamp rings that clamp down the tubing to the fitting. And PEX B, sometimes it's called Wurzbo PEX, and that is attached a different way. On the PEX B, you actually have an expansion tool that slides into the PEX pipe and makes it larger. And as it makes it larger, then you slide the fitting in because there's a collar around the pipe as well. So they both expand together and you slide the fitting in and then it shrinks back to its original shape and size. And that is a watertight seal. I've always liked the PEX B. I just feel more confident. It's a little bit easier to install as well because on the PEX A, when you have a tool that you have to crimp that ring on with, sometimes that tool is a little bit large to get into tight spaces. And the PEX B tool, the expansion tool, is pretty easy to fit just about anywhere. And we also talked about the ease of installation and maybe the cost difference of PEX versus copper. I think these days, even with prices the way they are, copper is a little bit less expensive than PEX. But when you're doing a big job with PEX, it's a lot easier to run through, you know, attic spaces, crawl spaces, and things like that. It flows really easily. So the time savings, I think, makes a bigger difference in the overall cost. I think running PEX versus copper might come out a little bit less expensive. One of the other things that we talked about too, in the differences of the two pipes, PEX A versus PEX B, is that if you put a kink in PEX A, you have to cut that section out and it's not usable. But if you kink PEX B, if you just heat that up, and you can heat it up with a plumber's torch, a propane torch, and it will go back to its original shape. It's kind of cool how it works. It gets almost clear when it's ready. And when you take the flame off, it's back to its original shape. So that's one of the benefits as well. And I think the other good thing about PEX is it has a 50-year life expectancy, and even copper is only 25, I believe.
And
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 it,
a kink is pretty much when you're with that line and you accidentally make a bend, so it'll kind of collapse on itself almost. Yeah.
right, yeah, it makes a really tight bend, and sometimes even when it bends, it'll make a little hole on the corners where it really bent and got all the pressure. So you definitely want to cut that out. And if you're using PEX A, you can cut it out and put in a union and join the two pieces. But then that's another step and another joint that could leak in the future. And I think one question you brought up is how easy it is it to install. And I think with just a few tips, anybody can install either one. The expansion tool, there are certain rules when you use it. You know, like if when you use those expansion rings over the pipe, you got to slide them on, make sure they're pushed down tight against the end of the tubing. Um, Depending on whether you're using half inch, 3/4 inch, or 1 inch PEX, the revolutions on the tool that you use make a difference too. For example, if it's half-inch pipe, you let it expand 6 to 7 times. If it's 3/4 inch pipe, it usually you end up at around 13 revolutions. And for 1 inch, I'm not sure what it is because we hardly ever use 1 inch pipe, but that's a difference. Um, and usually after you use an expansion tool, you're ready to pressure test. I usually let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes just to make sure everything is back to its original size and watertight. Then we'll turn the water on and check for leaks. I think over the years, we've only had one drip, and that was because the fitting that we used had a defect in it. They make brass fittings and they make plastic fittings. We typically use the plastic. There are a couple specialty fittings that you need to use in brass because they're threaded or something like that. And it's really easy to transition from copper to PEX or from galvanized to PEX because of the fittings that are available. When we're going copper to PEX, we can cut it and solder on, so one side is solderable to the copper. The other side has the barbs that are going to take the PEX. That's easy. If it's galvanized, one of the ends is threaded, whether it's half inch, male pipe thread to PEX. So it's super easy, and you don't have to worry about the two different metals not being not being able to work together. I think for example, if you're going from galvanized to copper, you're not supposed to screw a copper fitting onto galvanized pipe because it's easy for the two metals to react and they'll start corroding right away. So you usually would go galvanized, put a brass fitting on it, and then go to copper because the three work together and they won't corrode. But
Wow.
copper to galva is a thing you don't want to do. The other thing we talked about with PEX is that when the water freezes, the PEX can expand like 5 or 6 times its normal size, and when the water thaws, it goes back to its original shape without bursting. So that's another nice thing in colder climates. The
You had also talked about the red for the hot line, and I guess the coloring of it. You had mentioned there was that one incident where there was almost cracking or something like that.
Yeah, a friend of mine and I found this out through him when they were making the PEX. It didn't affect the blue, which is the cold water, but the one that's made red, and they infused the red color on the pipe. During that process, it changed the molecular structure of the pipe and it made it fail prematurely. So his whole house was done with PEX, and they had to go through the company that made the pipe did the fix, but they still had to open up walls and cut
Wow.
through things to make those repairs. So that was pretty tough. But they've resolved that issue since then. That was probably close to 10 years ago. The other thing that people have been nervous about is rodents because since the PEX is plastic, they think a rat can chew into it real easily. But over the years, I have never heard about that happening. One of the examples they gave us when we went through the PEX class was that, for example, if you're using half-inch PEX and there's a hole maybe 1 inch in diameter where a rat could almost get through, they will chew the pipe so they can get through the hole. But if you have the proper fittings, there's not going to be a gap around the pipe. So they're more likely to go somewhere else where it's easier to get through. And honestly, I mean, we've heard that in New York, rats can chew through steel pipe too. So I don't think too much of an issue, nothing to worry about.
And is it true for PEX, if you're adding an elbow to that line, it reduces the pressure?
Yeah, that's what we've learned. Every time you add a 90-degree angle, that the pressure could be decreased a little bit. So again, that's a benefit of PEX because you don't need to put as many as you would have to do if you were running copper.
Okay, so instead of adding an elbow, you just do maybe a longer wrap.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they have special fittings. Like if you're going to do a tight bend, they have special plastic. They're like braces. So you put the PEX through it and it lets it bend
Mm.
and turn the 90 without a fitting or a kink.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. What else you
And
got this week?
I also had a question on the TPR valve, the temperature pressure relief valve for
Yeah,
water.
that's a good one. That came up in an inspection report that we looked at for a friend too. On his water heater in his inspection, I didn't notice a TPR valve, but the valve is meant to open if the temperature gets too high or if the pressure in the tank gets too high, it'll open and release that pressure. And the valve itself is really small. It has a threaded opening on one side, and you would screw on a length of pipe that would come off of that and go down towards the floor. In California, we're supposed to have that within 6 inches of the floor. And the idea is that if it opened and you didn't have the pipe on there, that water could spray in somebody's face or, or hurt somebody spraying all that scalding water on them. So they want it to come out and drain down, exit towards the floor. In some areas, you need to actually get it and run it all the way outside the building. So if your water heater's in a garage, you'll see that line drop toward the floor, go along a wall, and poke out the side of a wall so it exits outside. And they're pretty important. So home inspectors will call that out every time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. In my limited work with PEX, I remember starting out with just a manual expansion tool. And after you go through three fittings, your hand is just broken. It's like you can't even squeeze. Then we converted to the Milwaukee expansion tool, and that was okay. But you're spot on because when we do the crimp and you're trying to get into a tight spot, you don't have that wingspan to get to
right.
that fitting. So I've even seen other tools, that crimper tools, where it's like you tighten it, then a light will come up telling you you've crimped enough, and that was a smaller miniature tool.
Hmm. Yeah, the tools have been a really good blessing, big blessing. The When I bought the tool, it's been years now, but it was about $400 for the PEX expansion tool. And I've never I've never done the crimping. I never trusted the crimp rings for some reason, but the other tool is a lifesaver. And that's only the only tool I've run across where they don't rent them at a tool rental supply store for some reason. I think there might be one or two specialty plumbing houses that do rent them. Um, but I think they rent them because typically they're renting them to a plumber who will take care of the tool, not a novice that would just be throwing it around because they you do need to calibrate them. I think it's after 10,000 uses, you can take them in and get them recalibrated to make sure that they're expanding the way they're supposed to. Yeah. So a lot of plumbing questions this week. You made me think of one that we're going through too. We're having to replace a water heater on one of our new units um, and it was a surprise to me because when the gas company came to light the water heater, they noticed that there was on the water heaters on the chamber, there's usually a little glass window you look through to see if the flame is on, and that glass window was missing. Our property manager got estimates, and the plumbers that they use won't replace just the window. It's kind of a special little thing. So we're going to replace the whole water heater for that reason. But it's a sealed burner, which is nice because back in the old days, there were two doors. One was right outside the chamber and one was on the outside of the water heater. So you would remove both doors to see the flame inside, and you used to have to light it with a match. And back in the day, if your water heater was in the garage, they would have you put it on a stand, and the water heater would be up, I believe it was about 16 inches off the floor. And the thinking was that since that flame was basically open to the air, when people park their cars in there and, you know, the cars drip oil or they drip a little bit of gas, those fumes, they hover right above the floor. So if your water heater was on the floor, there's a chance that those vapors could ignite and cause an explosion in the garage. So then they changed to the sealed units. So now you could actually put it on the floor because the flame's not open. It's not exposed to that air. And then to light the pilot, the little glass window gives you the opportunity to check it while you're lighting it. So you'll notice on your dial to turn the gas on the water heater, there's a setting that says pilot. So when you turn it on to pilot and you push the button down, it lets gas through the gas line into the chamber. And then there's also an igniter button on by the gas valve. So you just click the button and it sparks inside the chamber until there's enough gas to light. Once the pilot lights, there's an indicator light where you're holding the gas open, and it'll start blinking when it's okay to release the button. After you release the button, you open it all the way, and it lets the gas flow to your to the burner and light when it needs to light. And that's controlled by a thermostat. So as the water cools down, it'll let the water heater know that it needs to light up again to heat the water. The other safety is that where the flame is, it'll be burning on this little tube, and that's a thermocouple. So if the flame ever goes out, the thermocouple will get cold and it shuts down the gas. So it won't let gas just keep pumping in there and then explode if somebody lights a match or something like that. So they've gotten a lot safer over the years.
And we also talked about gate valves versus ball valves. And I just know for me, whenever I see a gate valve and I see it, even a little bit of corrosion, I I know it's gonna be a long day. I love ball valves so much. I much prefer that over the other.
Yeah, I think they're a lot better too. And like you said, I mean, we go and do a remodel on somebody's bathroom and we have to go shut the water off. You know, you got to turn the thing about 50 times to get it to close. If it closes, you know, and they corrode inside too. So if they're letting a little bit of water get by and we're trying to solder pipes or something with water dripping through the pipes, it's really hard. That's where PEX is another blessing, because as long as you get that one starter fitting on, from there, it doesn't matter if water's coming through the line because you're crimping and expanding, and you don't have to worry about sweating a copper pipe.
Yeah, and with gate valves, it's always when I close it and I turn it back on, then it leaks. Then the customer's like, "It was never leaking before. You must have did something." I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah, that's the whole thing about liability too. I mean, like for us, when we go on a job, we're the last ones to touch something. You know, it could be on the verge of failure, but we touched it last, so we're responsible to make it right. So that's a tough one. But yeah, I hate seeing those, and especially if they're partially underground and they've been covered by mud for years, and I don't even want to mess with them. Sometimes we'll go right to the street and shut the valve off at the street instead of messing with the shut off at the house. But since you brought that up, we just got notified by our insurance company that now they want to come out and verify that we have a shut off valve to shut the water off to the whole house. I guess in case there's a leak in the house, we can shut it off and it'll save damage. But that's, you know, we've talked about insurance over the last few weeks, and mostly it was about fire insurance and our rates going up, but now this is a new one. So I have to get a plumber to come out, look at the valve, make sure we have one, and send it to our insurance company, and he has to certify it. So that's another piece of paperwork. And Cynthia just got a notice the other day that in a couple of weeks somebody's going to come and do an external inspection of our house from the insurance company. So hopefully it's in good enough shape and they won't have any issues, but I can't imagine what they're going to call out.
Oh yeah, I'm interested to hear how that goes.
Yeah, I'll let you know for sure. I might be a little tipsy because I might need a couple drinks after they come, but
I
I'm
don't
sure.
blame you.
I'm sure. Well, thank you. Those were all great questions. Hopefully, it's going to help somebody out there, and we'll have
Absolutely.
some good topics. And again, please, if anybody has any questions or anything that they'd like to see a video on, we're doing projects all the time. We might be able to incorporate that and get you some good information.
Absolutely. Yeah, as an investor, you helped me out with my inspection report, so that was very beneficial. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Anytime. So we'll look forward to your questions next week.
All right.
Thanks.